Now, an inquest into the death of a transgender woman who killed herself whilst on an NHS waiting list has concluded, and a verdict is due today. Alice Litman from Brighton had waited nearly 3 years for gender-affirming healthcare before sadly taking her own life in May last year.
Well, her mother told the inquest that Alice had not been offered the care which could have saved her. Well, let's talk to Diversity and Inclusion Facilitator Katy Jon Went, who joins us now. Good to see you this morning. Look, this is... Let's be quite honest, because this is a controversial issue, and I have to say, particularly for a lot of our viewers and listeners. So let's handle this in the right way, because there are a lot of people out there who don't understand what difference it makes, what an issue it is for someone who is transgender awaiting this sort of care, this sort of surgery on the NHS. Clearly, the pressure is immense.
Absolutely, and I'm very definitely an older person rather than a young teen, but I waited nearly 8 years, and it made an immeasurable difference to my life afterwards. It removed the gender dysphoria that I had. So for me, it was a success story. It improved my mental well-being. But the problem is, I think, it's not even the actual... There's two problems here. One is how long it takes to even be seen a first appointment. In Alice's case, they'd already been seen. She'd been seen, I think, from the age of 17 or something, for anxiety and for suicidal ideation and for suicidal action already. And then the trans thing was on top of that. And the transition from age 18 to 19 takes you out of child and adolescent mental health services and into kind of adult mental health services. And it is well known that there is a kind of a gap in the handover of care there. My ex-wife is a psychiatrist, so I'm fairly familiar with what I heard about this problem of transferring people who are teens into young adult mental health care. But the problem is not only this 3-year wait in Alice's case to be seen, it's the fact that in that 3-year wait, there is no real additional support. If you're waiting 3 years for a mental health condition, gender dysphoria, then you should be being seen regularly by hopefully an NHS-funded therapist, because that's what will actually help you get through the wait before you even get that initial assessment. The difference between physical and mental health is that physical health is allegedly guaranteed an 18-week maximum wait time. You know, whether it's trans or whether it's simply the umbrella term of mental health, which Alice had additional things going on with as well, we should not be waiting 3 years for appointments or 18 months to see a therapist.
Why is the waiting time so long?
Well, the waiting time is long in mental health in general. Well-being and therapeutic services are severely underfunded. Then it's doubled again if you're trans, because then you're looking for a highly specialized area. This isn't even the wait to see the surgeons. This is the wait to see the psychologists, to see the psychiatrists, to see the psychotherapists within the NHS gender identity services. And obviously, because there's been these investigations and the complete change of services around the Tavistock and Portman and things like that, and the former Charing Cross Clinic, there's a restructuring going on, which is making it worse at the moment anyway. They were already considering rolling out more, but then we've had this sex-gender culture war that has actually kind of put a temporary delay on it, and nobody wants to get behind this. What they should really be doing is backing increased youth and young adult mental health services and having kind of gender identity included within that, so that people can access it rather than have to go to 3 or 4 specialist clinics around the country that can be hours away and years away.
What is... I can't quite understand how people cope with what is going on, because there is, you talked about the sort of gender-sex culture war, and there is, as a result of that, and more of an anti-trans sentiment growing in the UK, which, I have to say, I think is driven by a total lack of understanding, isn't it, about what trans people actually go through. And how do you begin to even tackle that? I know it's a much bigger issue, but the sort of lack of knowledge, a lack of understanding and a lack of sympathy, actually, is problematic, isn't it?
Yeah, I think you handle it by handling two things separately. One is the kind of the sex, gender, ideology, biology versus identity discussions. Have them, and I engage in them all of the time. But I never get personal. That's one. So you tackle the subject, you attack the idea, you pull it apart, you question the procedures, the policies, what this is doing. Absolutely do that. But you don't launch into a hate campaign. You don't launch into a dehumanization campaign. We can see what dehumanization is doing in the Middle East right now. But with the sex and gender, both sides are kind of dehumanizing each other. I do have great people I engage with on the gender critical side who actually say, look, I have no problem with trans people living their lives, but I question this around youth or around ideology or around it being too fast. So questions are acceptable, but we must continue to humanize this and discover the empathy around another person's struggle. Surely we can have at least that at a personal level to say, I'm not happy that you're going through this. And on the subject of this person's actual suicide, I have a suicide history in my own past and actually in my recent past. And I actually got a lot of empathy from gender critical people who messaged me saying, I'm so sorry, Katy, you're going through this. That sucks. And my suicides were nothing to do with being trans. But it is interesting that people can step out of the battle and find the human in a conversation. And I think in this case, we need to find the human. And at an individual basis, someone seeking help, we have to be on the side of getting them help and getting them help quickly, getting them qualified help, getting them open-minded help. And I think we can all back that. When we start talking about, is there an ideological campaign going on here? Then yes, we can pull that apart. But let's keep that separate from the individuals who are suffering and are at a high risk of suicide. I know the figures are debated as to whether it's X percent or that percent, and we can pick apart and find different reports that say different numbers. But even the NHS speaks of a figure of around 30% of trans people attempt to take their lives, which is higher than the average. But there are also comorbidities for those with mental health understanding, recognizing that around a quarter of trans people are neurodiverse as well. A large number of trans people have additional mental health things going on, and they should be treated alongside being trans. Being trans and curing being trans through transition should not be seen as a panacea to kind of curing all the additional mental health things that were going on in that person as well. I've known people who've taken their lives after because everyone assumed, oh, right, your depression is gone now. And it hadn't.
Look, you make some really interesting points. I wish we had longer, but sadly we don't this morning. But Katy, really good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed.
Gosh.
Humanity.
Yes,
that was the key message. Let's just
back to that, isn't it?
show some humanity to each other, which isn't, as Katy pointed out, is not happening elsewhere in the world at the moment.